The disciples were still basking in the joy and awe of resurrection and wondering when Jesus would restore the kingdom to Israel, when Jesus told them, "You shall receive power after the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses." And after all that has transpired, after witnessing Jesus being crucified and resurrected and then being taken up from them into heaven, they settle in an upstairs room to regroup. They're going to make some decisions that will keep the ministry of the way alive. And they are trying to figure out how to go forward without the one who had led them. And they are in that liminal space of praying and waiting. Luke doesn't tell us exactly what those disciples were feeling, but I suspect that many of us know something about those times when the way forward is not even clear to us, even when our faith remains secure. Even if we, in some sense, know that God is with us, we're in that space where we don't know which way to go. I remember that the old saints of the church of my youth referred to this time, this posture, as a time when the people of God needed to push. Now, they didn't mean putting pressure on an object or something to move it. No, they were using an acronym, PUSH. And PUSH means pray until something happens. So when the pastor said, we need you to push, they knew that he was inviting them to pray until something happens. It's not clear where we're going in the future. And I wonder if that describes those disciples in that room when they are picking someone to take Judas's place and they are trying to decide how this ministry is going to unfold. I suspect they were praying until something happens, waiting for God to move. And wouldn't you know it, when the day of Pentecost had come, a festival day, something indeed happened. Oh, the images described here bespeak of the movement of God as of from old. A sudden loud sound, a violent wind, divided tongues of fire. God is acting. Something is about to happen. The Spirit of God fills the room and fills them. Oh, I sometimes want to know what it was like to be sitting in that room, wondering, praying until something happens and the Spirit of God moves. And so whatever fear, whatever hesitation, whatever disconnection the apostles felt was washed away in an unexpected, untamed, uncontrollable, indiscriminate grace of God filling the room and filling them. And then, here's when you know that something's really going on. Without regard for their safety or decorum, they ran out of the room and began to proclaim, began to testify, began to prophesy about all that God has done, about God's deeds of power. But here's the thing. They weren't just testifying and proclaiming. They were speaking in all kinds of languages. And then people were starting to hear in their languages. I tell you, I don't know what that looks like, but I'm just going to leave it this way. Something happened. And then the Spirit of God began to disrupt the routine of the festival pilgrimage and begin to fulfill that promise of power. And all the barriers to speaking and hearing, all the barriers to communicate, all the barriers to understanding what had happened begin to fall away, and the word goes forth. It's God's surprising intervention. There is no silencing of voices. There's no silencings of language. Anybody who's open to speaking and hearing, God made it so. Oh, I think you missed your shout there a little bit there. Anything that was holding them back, anything that there was no more fear, there was no more sin. Let me put it this way. You know how it feels. I can't stay in this closet anymore. Oh, that's how the disciples felt. We can't stay in this room. We got to tell them all about Jesus. See, you all still, you didn't get it. I thought you would jump up when I did that. But the reaction of the crowd is telling. The reaction of the crowd is telling. What does this mean? What is this? Those who could not or would not discern the movement of God thought the saints were drunk. What does this mean? Those who had ill will just said, this doesn't mean it. This doesn't make any sense. It couldn't even understand or be excited by the idea that people are speaking and hearing in languages. It didn't even occur to them. But let me tell you something. The curious and the seeking soon found out what happens when the empowering presence of God falls on flesh. You see, for Peter, the question, what does this mean, was not a rhetorical question. For Peter, the slander that they were drunk could not go unanswered. And then Peter, newly empowered by the very presence of the Holy Spirit, steps forward to bear witness, to proclaim, to testify. Oh, you know what I'm talking about. Have you been in a place where you found your voice? Where it seemed like you found just the right words to tell somebody what God was doing in your life. Oh, Peter steps forward and he takes as his inspiration the prophet Joel. And he began to talk about how the holy power was indiscriminately falling on people, falling on all flesh, empowering all God's children. Men, women, children, young, old, even slaves, empowering these people to find their voices, to accept their calls, and spread the gospel. Let me put it this way. When the people were asking, what does this mean? Oh, Peter was not so much trying to offer an explanation than he was trying to give them an invitation. Come and let the Spirit of God fall on your flesh. Oh, come, open yourself to God's movement and be empowered to spread the good news. And oh, that's what happened. The Holy Spirit transformed the frightened followers of a crucified leader into an empowered community determined to bear witness to God's work in the world. The Holy Spirit compelled a people considered powerless and inconsequential to the empire to break out of their closed room and reach out to a diverse community with good news of God's saving hope. Those same apostles sitting in that room praying until something happened now display spirited lives, empowered and emboldened to go and spread the good news. Oh, they won't be silent. They won't be hiding anymore. They won't be afraid anymore. God is not through with them yet. Oh, some people thought when the crucifixion happened, oh, this was over, it's gone. But no, God was not through. God was pouring out God's Spirit on all flesh. And so now they have everything they need to go out and be witnesses. In God's unfolding imagination, Willie Jennings says, a people unknown and undesired, that's what they were, unknown and undesired, now are filled with God's power and presence, and they're driven to go out and tell the world. Now, I know on any given day, I suspect that all of us have reached the limits of our own power. I know it. I know we have prayed for strength. We have prayed for a breakthrough. We have prayed for something to happen. And we have to confront our fears. We have to confront our sin. We have to confront our failure. There have been those moments when we've needed the very presence of God just to get through and make something happen. And those of us who live and exist on the margins know what it's like to languish in the futility of powerlessness, of hopelessness, and pray to God a prayer for liberation, for setting us free. And I think about that all the time when I see the faces, those pictures of those people right after the Stonewall Uprising, those young faces, those scared faces staring back out at us. And I often wonder about those people who one activist said were scheduled for non-existence, who were supposed to have no reality. And I wonder how they found their voice and they found their ability to spread the word about God's unconditional love for them. In 1970, the 1 year anniversary of Stonewall Uprising, they did something that was unprecedented, something that had never been done in history before. People who called themselves lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender walked out into public streets and proclaimed who they were without regard to their safety, because they were not safe. Without regard to decorum, you see some of the stuff they wore. Without regard to what was going to happen, stepped out into the middle of the street and began to bear witness that we are worthy of dignity and respect. I think about the Reverend Troy Perry, founder of Metropolitan Community Churches. He was the organizer, 1 year after Stonewall, the organizer of the first Pride March in Los Angeles. And he talks about that time as a time of great tension. People had no idea what would happen to them if they stepped out into the middle of the street and say, "Here we are, here we are." And he took some time convincing the members of his own church to, let's march in this parade. And they all got there, and nobody knew what was going to happen. No one knew what violence may fall on them. And everybody admitted to being, for this was new. This was new. And then what started off as a tense and hesitant parade became a joyous testimony. Troy Perry describes riding in a convertible and the members of MCC Los Angeles all behind him holding up signs, and they were singing "Onward Christian Soldiers." And people were looking in surprise and wondering, how could these people do this? What made them come out and do this? And after the parade, Reverend Perry was felt led to do something that LGBTQ people had never done before. Notice you see a pattern here, doing stuff that's never been done before. He decided to hold a prayer vigil at a busy intersection that is often populated by Krishna kids, the Salvation Army, and holiness folks with their offering plates. And he took up space there and began to pray, surrounded by the members of MCCLA. And a police officer came to tell them to get out of here or we're going to arrest you. Get out of here or we're going to arrest you. And they stayed and they began to pray and pray and pray. And people said, what does this mean? That these LGBTQ people are not afraid of the police? What does this mean that they're staying there and they're praying? And they indeed got arrested. But that arrest was a bearing of witness. What does it mean when a people unknown and undesired are no longer afraid to claim their full humanity? What does it mean that a preacher and pastor can be empowered to testify to his identity as both a follower of Jesus and a gay man, and bear witness to that identity at a pride march? Can we discern God's movement in the decision of marginalized people who could lose their jobs, their families, their careers, and possibly their lives, to accept the power of the Holy Spirit, to step out in public view and declare their full humanity? Perhaps it is the Spirit of God falling unexpectedly and predictably, just as Peter predicted, on all flesh. Perhaps this is the empowering God's expansive love and reach, calling displaced and disconnected believers to participate in God's work in the world in a new way to reach new people. How do I know? Because right after Troy Perry's arrest, churches, MCC churches, were planted in 8 cities before 1970 was out. The word. The word went forth. It went forth because they dared stand up and say, we are God's people. What does this mean? Perhaps for that time, for that movement, the Spirit of God was calling those people to be the ones through whom God will spread God's message of life. And I hope we see what is possible here. I hope that this experience of the Holy Spirit reminds us that we too are wonderful vessels for God to use for God's work. I hope that you are not waiting for an explanation of the Holy Spirit so much as you will accept the invitation. That you accept the invitation, that you will take the witness of Peter and God's people, that you will take the witness of Troy Perry and those first marchers, that you will take their witness, that God is indeed inviting you to allow the Spirit of God to move in our lives. I pray that you will know that the Holy Spirit isn't moving because of what we are doing. It is not moving because of who we say we are. The Holy Spirit isn't moving because we deserve it. The Spirit of God is a gift of God sent to give us power, to empower us to spread the good news, to empower us to tell the world, to empower us to go forth believing in the new thing that God is up to. The Holy Spirit's arrival means that we can come out of hiding. We can come out of our closets. We can come out of our fear. We can come out of our shame and let the world know of Jesus' unconditional love for all flesh. It didn't say some flesh. It said all flesh. Holy Spirit, rain down on us this day and go out those doors and spread the good news of God's unconditional love and saving hope for each and every one of you. Amen.